Hello dear students, I am pleased to welcome you to this presentation on Final Course Paper 6, Information Systems Audit and Control. This is part 2 of the presentation of Chapter 1, which is Concepts of Governance and Management of Information Systems. We'll be discussing here the role of IT in enterprises and IT strategic planning. Information technology is a key enabler for most modern enterprises. We'll understand how IT has to be deployed within enterprises. What are the key aspects which have to be considered in their deployment in terms of having the relevant processes, policies, procedures, and the organizational structures in place. We'll also discuss about the key concepts of IT strategic planning. One of the important aspects you would have seen underlying the concept of governance is the IT strategy should be aligned with the business strategy. How is IT strategy planning done? In what way is it different from business strategy planning? And this is what will be covered in the second part of this presentation, where we'll talk about IT strategy planning. Now let's come to the topic, role of IT in enterprises. What are the important aspects of role in IT in enterprises? So the common theme which has been explained in this is IT is being used not just for data processing, but for a strategic and competitive advantage. And the business processes are enabled through IT. The organizational structures which are implemented in the organization are also enabled through IT. So both the business process and the organizational structures are transformed through the effective and the right deployment of information technology. In fact, there is a radical transformation of how business processes are performed using information technology. You would have seen this in most enterprises where IT is extensively used. It's also essential to understand how IT deployment is oriented towards achieving the business objectives, because information technology is itself a key differentiator in modern enterprises. For example, the way information technology is used in an online store such as Amazon or Snapdeal or Flipkart, including the relevant processes, is the differentiator in their business. And that's what will ensure which of them will survive and thrive in the modern digital world. So we know the role of IT is critical, not only for the purpose of data processing, but for ensuring the very survival of the enterprise and the success of that enterprise. Most enterprises use information technology for the purpose of enabling business process change. And this is where we need to ensure value creation and benefit by using information technology. So it means the investment in information technology has to be channelized through the right IT projects, and also the expenditure on IT investment has to be controlled and monitored to ensure it provides value to the enterprise. Now let's look at the concept of business and IT strategy. So far, we have been talking about governance, and in governance, we said it's all about direction and control and steering the enterprise towards the enterprise objectives. Now, let's discuss the business strategy and the IT strategy and how IT strategy is to be aligned with the business strategy. We'll look at it in the context of the role of IT in the enterprises and how IT strategy is going to help the enterprise to achieve the business strategy. So, what is the business strategy? Business strategy outlines the approach of the enterprise and is formulated by the senior management. Based on the strategy adopted, the relevant policies and procedures are to be formulated. Okay, this is a concept of business strategy. Now let's look at the IT strategy. IT strategy affects the way in which the enterprise is structured, managed, and operated. Now, enterprise can no longer develop business strategy separate from the IT strategy, which means we need to ensure that IT strategy is aligned with the business strategy. Now, the concept or principles of what is business strategy, who is to do, is definitely applicable for the IT strategy also. But in the context of business strategy, we look at business as a whole in terms of what the business is going to accomplish. In the context of IT strategy, we are looking at IT and how IT is going to enable the business to achieve the goals. This is what is important. Another important concept you should know when you look at business and IT strategy is we always want to ensure that we are in control. And this is where we need to know the definition of controls, which we already discussed twice. Control refers to the policies, procedures, practices, and the enterprise structure or the organization structure that are designed to provide reasonable assurance that the business objectives will be achieved. Now, this is the key term. When you look at controls, you need to have controls so that the business object will be achieved and the risks are managed, and that risk managed through the undesired events which are prevented or detected and corrected. Now, let's understand what is the role of the auditor in the business and the IT strategy. Fundamentally, the role of the auditor is to review and evaluate. If you remember the terms, review and evaluate, this was there in the definition also of controls and also in the definition of IS audit. Now, in the case of IT strategy and the business strategy, the management is responsible for implementing this. As an IS auditor, will review the information systems as implemented from the control perspective to verify whether all the control considerations have been effectively taken into consideration while formulating the business and the IT strategy. You could also provide consulting before, during, or after the implementation of the IS strategy to ensure that IT strategy is in tune with the business strategy. In many IT audit assignments, this IT strategic review, a planning or consultation is a separate assignment which could be done by IT auditor. If an auditor has to perform this role of reviewing the business and IT strategy, it's important the auditor has a good understanding of the management aspects as relevant to the deployment of IT and IT strategy. If you remember, we said ISCA is all about technology and its management, technology and the audit. So if you look at ISCA from another perspective, ISCA is all about digital data and the management of information of the digital data. Auditor will also review what are the performance measures which the organization has, what are the objectives which have been set, and whether these are aligned with the enterprise goals or the organization goals. What is the role of the management in the case of the business and IT strategy? The management will have to define what are the strategies and the tactics which will be adopted by the organization to ensure that the day-to-day operations are delivered efficiently and without compromise. They'll also set the metrics and the goals are established to help the IT perform on a tactical basis and also to guide the efforts of personnel to improve maturity of the practices. Now, the auditors can verify these aspects. Auditors can validate that the metrics are being measured. First of all, they can also verify whether these metrics are properly set, and then they can verify whether these are measured, and they represent a realistic view of how the actual IT operations delivered the result. And this can be done both from a strategic and a tactical basis or an operational basis. Now let's look at some of the committees which are required to implement in an IT organization to effectively ensure that IT achieves the objectives or the organization has the governance structures in place. What are the committees which is used effectively to ensure or steer the deployment of how IT is used is called as the IT steering committee. So if you look at the word here, we are talking about steering the deployment of IT towards the enterprise objectives. What is the constitution of the committee? This is a high-level committee which is appointed by the senior management. They are led by a member from the board of directors, comprised of the functional heads from all the key departments, including audit and IT department. It's also important to ensure that the roles and responsibilities are documented and approved by the senior management. What are the functions which are performed by the IT steering committee? They ensure that the long and short-range plans of the IT department are in tune with the enterprise goals and the objectives. This is where you talk about alignment, establish the size and scope of the IT function, how big is going to the IT department, and also sets priorities. For example, if an organization wants to implement an ERP software, what is the IT infrastructure requirements in terms of the personnel required. What is the priority in which this ERP software has to be deployed across the enterprise, across various departments? These are important aspects which will be considered and decided by the IT steering committee. They'll also review and approve all the major IT deployment projects in all the stages. So fundamentally, they will review and steer the deployment of IT to ensure their utilization or effective implementation. They'll also approve and monitor the key projects by measuring the result of the IT projects in terms of the return on investment. For example, an enterprise has implemented an ERP software and the IT steering committee has approved the review of the ERP software. Then the steering committee will also review whether the results were achieved after they were deployed. They'll also review the IS plans and budgets and also monitor the overall IT performance. These are basic functions of the IT steering committee. Let's look at some of functions. They'll also review and approve the standards, policies, and procedures, make decisions on all key aspects of IT deployment and implementation, and also facilitate implementation of IT security within the enterprise. And they'll also resolve conflicts in deployment of IT and ensure availability of viable communication system between IT and its users. You'll find many times you'll have questions pertaining to the role and the functions of the IT steering committee. Now, depending on the number of marks which are given, whether it's 8 marks or 4 marks, you need to remember that you give the points. Now, if you have to understand, you need to remember the role of the IT steering committee is to steer. So you'll also need to know the constitution. Once you know the constitution, who is the members of the committee and what do they perform, then you find it becomes very easy to understand the different role or the responsibilities of the IT steering committee. They will be reporting the board of directors on the IT activities on a regular basis. Now let's look at one more committee, which is the IT strategy committee. There could be a question on the distinction between the IT strategy committee and the IT steering committee. Now, if you look at the word here, the key word here is IT strategy. So this committee is more critical for the enterprise because they look at IT from a strategic perspective. The IT strategy committee offers advice on how IT is going to be used at a strategic level. Based on the role or the direction set by the IT steering strategy committee, the IT steering committee will get into the implementation and focus on how it has to be implemented. The IT strategy committee will also ensure that the board is able to effectively direct and control how IT is going to be used. Now let's look at the second aspect where we get into the nitty-gritties of how IT strategy planning is done. What is IT strategy planning and why are they required? IT strategy plans provide direction to the deployment of information system. Why information systems are required, how they're going to be used, where are they going to be deployed. This is what will be directed through the IT strategy plans. Now it's important the management has to communicate to the various business process owners and the relevant parties what is the IT strategy plan. They need to capture and report the feedback from the business process owners as to how effective or implementable the IT strategy planning, and that know the validity of the usefulness of the plans. How is an IT strategy planning done? Let's understand the process. You need to remember that the changes in the environment pertaining to the business are dynamic in nature. Hence, the IT strategy planning has to be dynamic to consider and make changes as required based on the changes in the business environment and the IT conditions. For example, there's a new technology which has come in which enables a delivery of, let's say, the goods through drones. Then in that case, the IT strategy planning and the business plan has to be modified to see that this is incorporated. Otherwise, the competitor may adopt the technology and may take over most of the customers. The IT strategy planning will also consider that it has long-term perspective, so it means it has long-range plans, and these long-range plans need to be translated into IT short-range plans. So you have the long-range plans which are generally considered to 3 to 5 years, and these are considered translated into IT strategic plan, which is generally considered to be of 1 year. Ensure that appropriate IT function resources are allocated. This is another important aspect which has to be considered as part of the IT strategic planning process. And this has to be done in tune with the IT long range plans. The short range plans which are prepared should also be reassessed and amended or modified and updated periodically in response to the changing business and IT conditions. Let's look at IT strategic planning and the levels. So you have strategic planning, which is done at the macro level, the top management level. Then you have the management control and the operational controls. These are the three levels of managerial activity in an enterprise. Let's look at strategic planning and the four key aspects. So when you're doing strategic planning, the first thing to do is to prepare the enterprise strategic plan. So this is the strategic planning at the enterprise level. Based on this, you prepare the IS or the IT strategic plan. So based on the enterprise strategic plan, you prepare the IS strategic plan. Based on the IS strategic plan, you need to prepare the resource requirements of the resource requirement plan. And based on the requirement plan, you prepare what is called the IS applications and the facility plan. So you find we're actually moving from the top to the bottom. Right from the strategy, we decide overall for the business, what is the business strategy? Based on the business strategy, we decide what should be the IT strategy. Based on the IT strategy, we decide what should be the resources. Based on the resources, we get to the details of what are the applications, what are the facilities we need to set up. For example, an enterprise decides to launch an e-commerce store to garner, let's say, 20% share of the market, or to increase the turnover by X percentage. So based goals, the enterprise strategy, the IT deployment of the IT infrastructure has to be created or to be outsourced by using the right resources. Based on this, you will decide for the type of business process and the business transactions you want to do, what are the type of the requirements we need to have for IT. Resources need to be acquired internally or they might be acquired from an outsourcing vendor. Now let us discuss in detail the four aspects of the IT strategic plan. The first part is the enterprise strategic plan. There are some basic principles you should remember that the business planning determines the overall plan of the enterprise. If you remember, IT strategy plan has to be based on the business plan. This is the key aspects of all governance definitions. The enterprise strategic plan provides the overall charter of the constitution under which all the units of the enterprise, including the IS function, has to operate. The primary plan prepared by the top management, that is the overall strategic plan, will guide how the long-run development of the enterprise is going to happen. Let's look at some of the key aspects pertaining to the enterprise strategic plan. It provides the statement of mission of the enterprise. It specifies the strategic objectives which are going to be achieved. It also assesses the factors which will affect the organization from the environmental perspective, from the business perspective, and how it will impact the achievement of these objectives. The statement of strategies which are going to be formulated for achieving the objectives, and also what are the constraints that apply. For example, let's say there is a payment bank which has been started. So the mission of the payment bank is going to be set. Based on that, they'll decide what are the strategic objectives which are going to be achieved. They'll also consider the regulatory and the business environment in which they operate. They'll also decide how strategically this payment bank is going to be deployed across various parts of India, what type of technology is going to be used, and what are the constraints in terms of the business impact on account of this use of the strategic plan in the way they achieve the mission. We'll also list out the priorities. For example, where are the business plans going to be rolled out? How it's going to be rolled out? So we know very clearly, which has also been emphasized many times, in an IT environment also, it's important that the IT plan is aligned with the enterprise plan. So please remember, quite often the most important word pertaining to governance is alignment, whether the IT strategic plan is aligned with the business. Let's look at the second aspect, which is the IS strategic plan. The IS strategic plan focuses on obtaining the optimum benefit from the IT opportunities which are available. So which means you need to balance the IT opportunities vis-a-vis the business requirements and also ensure that these are achieved. You also need to ensure that the enterprise has a strategic planning process undertaken at regular intervals, giving rise to the long-term plans. And the long-term plan should be also translated into operational plans. So you see here that the concepts which we had pertaining to the business strategy are also applicable to the IS strategy. The same concepts or principles are applicable. So if you studied the same for business strategy, you know the same principles apply to the IT strategy, but it applies to IT. Let's look at the IS requirement plan. Based on the IT strategy, we need to decide what are the information systems requirement. Now, this is where we get into the information architecture. So here we're looking at the enterprise in totality in terms of what should be the information architecture. How will the information be generated? How will it be processed? How will it be stored? Who will have access to this information? And this is where I said you need to look at information from the architecture perspective. And what is the perspective? You need to optimize the organization of information system within the enterprise. So what does it require? This requires that you have a creation and continuous mechanism of the business information model. How is the business going to be done? And what are the systems which we need for the purpose of ensuring the optimum use of this information? Now, based on the information architecture, we'll also decide the IS requirements plan. And based on this, we also have the information requirements. The IS requirement plan defines the information system architecture for the information system department. So if you look at here, primarily we are moving from the information architecture to the IS architecture based on the business model and based on the information requirements of the enterprise. Let's understand the layers of the enterprise architecture. You have the business unit architecture, which means what is the architecture at the level of the business unit. So what does it focus on? As the term implies, it focuses on the core business processes. It also focuses on what is the mission of the enterprise, what is the vision, what are the goals, what are the standards and the policies. Then you look at the information architecture. As the word implies, we are looking at information flow within the enterprise. This analyzes the way information is used by the enterprise. You'll also look at the various types of information which is available in different formats, such as the original documents, the data, the revisions, classification, and who are the organizational units responsible for managing and maintaining this data. You need to know one important thing. In a digital environment, the owner of the business process data still remains the business process owner, but the custodian of the data is the IT department. So the IT department is not the owner of the data, the business process owner is the owner of the data, the IT department is only the custodian. Let's understand the next aspect, which is the information systems architecture. Based on the information architecture, you decide what the type of the specific information requirements of different people in the organization and establish a framework for this flow of data as per the information architecture using the relevant information systems. So this is where you bring in specifications, the requirements, the different types of application software we need to use, what are the modules we want to use, the database and the procedures. And then you have the data architecture, which focus on how the data is maintained, accessed and utilized. You'll also have the data definitions, data dictionaries and data elements. From an ISCA perspective, I think it's important you need to understand what are the 4 levels or 4 types of architecture. So we're looking at macro level, we're starting from the business unit. From the business unit, we're looking at business units require information. This information has to be organized in information systems, and this information system has to be organized as per a particular data requirement. This is what you need to understand. There is also delivery system architecture, which focuses on how the information is going to be delivered to the various users. It also talks about the physical IT infrastructure, how the physical IT infrastructure is going to be created. Let's look at the key enablers for the information architecture. In fact, in most digital enterprises, the way the information is architected will decide the success of IT deployment within the enterprise, how well they're able to use this information as a resource. So there could be an automated data repository and dictionary, which means they know very clearly what are the different types of data elements. For example, let's say you are a customer of Flipkart. Flipkart would have the complete data repository of all its customers, including the various data elements, and they should be able to channelize and use it properly, organize this data using specific syntax rules. This should also comply with the regulatory requirements pertaining to data privacy, protection, etc. You also need to establish who has data ownership of this particular data, and also the criticality and security classification of this data. For example, the data pertaining to purchases, who are the authorized purchasers, what are the rate at which they can purchase, who can create the supplier. All these are aspects which have to be clearly defined. Based on the data ownership, you also decide what are the information model which represent the business based on the business requirements. So you also need to have the information architecture standards as to how the information is going to be architected at the enterprise level. Now let's look at the information system requirement plan. So the architecture we know specifies what are the major organizational functions which are needed to support the planning, control, and operation activities, and what are the data classes associated with each function. For example, let's say a purchase department, what are the different elements of data they have to access? Similarly, let's say the sales department, what are the different types of data elements they have to access? The business plan, what the enterprise wants to achieve, will decide what are the information needs of the enterprise. This goes without saying, because you know, depending on what the business wants to achieve, the information architecture has to be created. Based on that, the information systems have to be there, and based on that, you decide who will have access to what information. The information architecture will determine the information needs, not only the information needs, as to how the information will flow. For example, let's say Flipkart has a system of generating customers. When the customer logs in and creates, the access of this information about the creation of the customer ID has to be used or made available to specific segments who monitor these customers, who are in charge of these customers. Now, once the customer has been created, that information about the creation of the customer has to flow within the enterprise. Similarly, if a supplier is created in the database of the e-commerce supplier, this particular information, depending on the category, has to go to the specific category manager who will decide how the information has to be processed further and what action is to be taken. So based on the information architecture, the organization structure has to be created in terms of the hierarchy of who will have access and who is going to be reporting to whom. We'll also have specific information system. For example, you'll have a purchase system or procurement system or a sales system. And for this, we'll also have the relevant IT and the related processes. Now, depending on the information requirements, the organization can decide whether they're going to acquire the software or they're going to develop the software. And you also need to ensure the relevant controls are built based on the business requirement. For example, let's say a supplier is created. Who can create a supplier? What is the limit for the supplier? What is the rate at which this particular goods has to be purchased? How the rates are going to be changed? All this has to be defined in terms of the business information model. And based on that, you also need to decide who is going to have access to this particular data. You'll also decide the criticality and sensitivity of the data. You'll also need to protect this particular data from unauthorized access. Now let's look at the next part, which is the last segment of this, where we look at the IS application and the facility plan. On the basis of the information systems architecture and the priorities which are there allocated to the management, the IS management will develop the IS application facility plan, which will tell what are the resource requirements, and this could be in terms of the specific application systems which are required to be developed, along with the time schedule for this. You'll also have the hardware and software acquisition policy when it's going to be acquired. You'll also have the facilities which are required to house this hardware and the software. You'll also have the organizational changes or the resource requirements in terms of the personnel. Let's look at the IS application facilities plan. Who is responsible for the IS application facilities plan? So this IS application facility plan is to be developed by the senior management based on the long and short range plans, and this should be in tune with the enterprise missions and goals. They should also consider are there any IT issues, and they should also consider the opportunities which are there by using this IT. and this has to be reflected in the short-range plans. The IT long and short-range plan should be developed to ensure that IT is aligned with the mission and the business strategies of the enterprise. The strategic planning, as I said, could cover from 1 to 3 years, while the short-term planning could be for a period of 1 year. Some of the key concepts pertaining to IS application facilities plan. So one is, we said, aligned with the business strategy plans. So it means you need to ensure achievement of business objectives. This could be done by the top management or by the steering committee. Strategic planning facilitates putting the organizational objectives into specific time-bound plans and actions, which means you decide what the enterprise is going to achieve, and then you decide what is going to be achieved when and how, and what are the resources which are required. So when you're doing a comprehensive planning, you need to ensure that this is done by involving all the relevant stakeholders, and you are sure that this will help in an effective and efficient enterprise. The strategic planning has to be done proactively. This has to be time and project oriented. It also has to determine the priorities in which the business goals are going to be met. What are the enablers of the IS strategic plan? What do you need to have if you want to develop the IS strategic plan? Now, this is an important aspect. We may have questions around this. First, you need to know what is the business strategy. You need to know how IT is going to support the business objectives. You need to have an inventory of what are the different types of technology solutions available, and also the current infrastructure deployed within the enterprise. You need to monitor what are the technology which is available and the emerging technology, so you can decide to deploy the right level of technology without going obsolete very soon. You also need to ensure timely feasibility studies and reality checks are done to ensure that what has been planned is actually realistic and achievable. And the existing systems which are within the enterprise, there has to be an assessment to check what are the information systems is available and how far it will be useful and the changes required in the existing systems. It's also important while preparing the IS strategic plan that you need to consider the risk appetite. You need to consider the time and the period which is required and the quality at which the goods and services will be delivered. Most of the commerce which is happening now in the digital world, you find the key differentiator is not the technology deployment, but the processes and the systems they have. And when you want to deploy an IS strategic plan, you need to have the senior management buy-in, commitment, and support. And they should critically review, because fundamentally, you're developing the IS strategic plan based on the business plan. So the business should know that the IS strategic plan will help them to achieve the business strategic plan. Let's look at the objective of the IT strategy. The primary objective is to provide a holistic view of the current IT environment. What is the future direction in which IT is going to be used, the business is going to run, and what are the initiatives the enterprise needs to have to migrate. Further, it's important, you'll find this term repeated again and again, align, and that's the key aspect of governance. We also need to communicate to all the stakeholders so that the established accountabilities are clearly understood. Let's look at some more options pertaining to the objective IT strategy, which will summarize the discussion we had so far. All the strategic options should be identified, they should be structured, and they should be integrated, and all this should be linked together with the business plans. Let's look at some of the key management practices. Practices at the operational level, which has done for aligning the IT strategy with the enterprise strategy. First is we need to understand what is the direction which the enterprise is moving, assess the current environment, capabilities and the performance, define what is that which is to be achieved in terms of the target IT capabilities, conduct a gap analysis in terms of what you want to achieve and what is the current IT infrastructure and what is the gap. Based on that, define the strategic plan and roadmap and communicate the IT strategy and direction. Now let's look at an example to understand this. Now let's say an enterprise which is in the physical world now wants to get into the digital commerce. Okay. So, and they have set a target that like to garner a share of, let's say, 25% market share, or they want to increase the turnover by 50%. Okay, so they have decided in the next 3 years we are going to convert all of business process into most of the commerce. 50% of the business is going to be done through the e-commerce mode. So that's the direction in which the enterprise is going. So for achieving that goal, currently, what is the IT environment we have? We need to decide. Further, we need to define what is the target for achieving this turnover of 50%. What is the type of a IT target we need to look at? What are the capabilities of IT infrastructure we need to have? Looking at the gap between the current environment and the defined target capabilities, we'll be able to identify the gaps. And based on the gaps, you need to prepare a strategic roadmap to bridge this gap and communicate this strategy and direction. How do you understand the enterprise direction? You need to understand the current enterprise environment, what are the business processes being done, what is the enterprise strategy, what is the future we want to achieve, what are the external business environment which you're operating, and that could be in terms of the industry drivers, the relevant regulations, competition, etc. So what is meant by assess the current environment? Capabilities and performance. So you assess the performance of the current internal business processes, what are the IT capabilities, and what are the different types of IT services we are using internally and through external service providers. We need to understand the enterprise architecture as related to IT, identify what are the issues currently being experienced and develop the recommendations to mitigate this and how to improve this. Also consider the service providers which are going to be used in terms of the differentiator in the options, the financial impact, the costs, and the benefits. Now let's look at the target capabilities. When you look at the target capabilities, you need to understand the enterprise environment and the requirements, assess the current business process you're performing, what are the IT environment which you're currently using and what are the issues pertaining to this, and what are the best practices, standards, and guidelines which can be used, and what are the emerging technologies, whether they've been already used, whether these have been validated, and then what are the innovation proposals, the new ideas or initiatives which the enterprise can define. So this decides how the enterprise is going to navigate the information highway to achieve the enterprise objectives in the near future based on the business strategy. Now we need to conduct a gap analysis, which means you need to, when you're doing a gap analysis, basically you know what is the current environment, what is the target environment. The difference between the current and the target environment will give you the gap. So you'll also define what are the business outcomes you want to achieve and how the strategy is going to be executed. And then you identify the gap between the current and the target environment. You also align the assets in terms of the capability and the support services which are required. So when you look at business outcomes, you look at what is that we want to achieve, how much investment we can make, and how we utilize these resources which we have internally or through external service providers. So when you look at strategy execution, it's important to ensure that we have identified the critical success factors which support the execution of the strategy. Now let's look at the next part, which is define the strategy plan and the roadmap. When you're preparing a strategic roadmap or plan, it's important to ensure that all the relevant stakeholders are involved. You take the input and ideas from all the relevant stakeholders. So this could be in terms of how IT goals contribute to the enterprise strategic plans and how IT will support IT-enabled investment program. What are the investments which is going to be there? You also decide the business process which is existing and how IT will support this business process. You'll also decide what are the different types of IT services which are existing or which are going to be launched, and then also the requirement for the IT assets. Let's define the strategic plan and the roadmap. We know that IT should define the initiatives which are required to ensure that we close the gaps between the current and the future. We also develop the sourcing strategy, how the IT resources are going to be sourced. What are the measures we need to have to monitor the achievements of the goals? Prioritize these initiatives and then combine them in a high-level roadmap. Let's look at how do you communicate this IT strategy and direction. We need to create awareness, understanding of the business and the IT objectives because all the key stakeholders have to be involved so they clearly know what the direction in which the enterprise is moving and what the direction in which the IT is moving. And this is captured in the IT strategy document. And this has to be communicated through appropriate training or communicated to the stakeholders and also the relevant users throughout the enterprise. How do we measure the success of alignment of IT and the business strategy? And now this is some of the key goal indicators. So we can look at what are the percentage of enterprise strategic goals and the requirements which are supported by IT strategy plans or goals. What is the stakeholder satisfaction with the scope of the planned portfolio of programs and services? You also look at what is the percent of IT value drivers which are mapped to the business value drivers. Let's look at the next concept, which is the business value from the use of IT. There are three key aspects. You evaluate, direct the value optimization, and you monitor the value optimization. If you remember this term, EDM, this is one of the key aspects of governance. So when you're implementing IT strategy, you use the same concept of evaluate the strategy plan, direct the strategy plan, and monitor the strategy plan. And this is done with the perspective of value optimization, which means from the perspective of business value from IT. How do we derive business value from IT? What are the measures to know that we are arriving or deriving the business value from use of IT? This gives you some sample. Percentage of IT-enabled investments, how many IT-enabled projects are taken, and what are the benefit whether they have been achieved, what are the claimed benefit whether the actual benefits, what are the percent of IT services where the benefits have been actually realized with clearly defined and approved operational cost with the cost benefit analysis. You also look at the satisfaction of the key stakeholders in terms of the transparency, understanding and communication, and also accuracy of the financial project which you've taken. Now, if you look at the best practices for IT performance management, we need to look at the business contribution, we need to look at the future orientation, we also need to consider the excellence, the operational excellence in terms of the processes and practices which makes the enterprise processes as a key differentiator. We also need to look at the user satisfaction, how well the users are trained. This is also based on the principles of the balance scorecard, which has these 4 dimensions, which is the business contribution, which is in terms of the business value, which is future orientation, and the operational excellence, the processes which are there, and the customer satisfaction of the users or the internal processes which are available. Now let's look at some of the questions which could come pertaining to this particular chapter. First, explain how information technology plays a critical role in a modern enterprise. So this, I'm sure you should be able to explain. We are looking at primarily IT being used for a strategic and competitive advantage. IT is key for survival and success in a modern enterprise. Explain the scope and objectives of the IT strategy. Why is IT strategy required? What are the areas which are covered? And how is it done? So broadly, we look at the objectives. Why do you need to have an IT strategy? The third question could be pertaining to the IT steering committee, which we have discussed. You need to know what is the role of the IT strategy committee, steering committee, or who are the members, what is the constitution, and what are the key functions or roles of the IT steering committee. What is the role of the IT strategy committee? Now, the distinction between strategy committee and the IT committee, IT steering committee, IT strategy committee is done as a committee of the board. They actually guide the board in ensuring that IT is channelized towards the achievement of the business objectives. Based on the goals set by the IT strategy committee, as per the directions of the board, the IT steering committee will help in implementation or rollout of the IT strategy by practical implementation and monitoring the utilization. IT strategy planning is critical for enterprises. Please explain with examples. I have given you some example of an enterprise which goes into e-commerce. You can also give an example of a bank which goes in for, let's say, e-banking, or a new bank which wants to launch a payment bank. So you can look at how IT strategy planning is done right from the enterprise level, then you come back to the IT level, and then you walk down the different areas, how the planning is done for IT strategy at different levels. Please explain how IT strategy planning is aligned with the enterprise strategy plan to ensure value from investments. This is another question where you look at how do we prepare an IT strategy plan, what are the processes which are involved, and based on this, you need to ensure alignment of the IT strategy plan with the enterprise strategy plan. So it means we need to know the steps for the purpose of ensuring that IT strategy plan is aligned with the enterprise strategy plan. So you have discussed this earlier in detail of what are the steps to be followed. Let's look at the last question. Explain some of the key features of the IS requirement plan. The IS requirement plan provides the requirements pertaining to the information systems of the enterprise based on the overall information system architecture of the enterprise. So you need to decide what are the resource requirements in terms of the information systems as per the business strategy, which is in tune with the IT strategy. Let's have a quick recap of what we have discussed. If you remember, in the first part of the presentation, the focus was on governance, and governance was primarily based on direction and control. In the second part of the presentation, we are primarily focusing on alignment of IT strategy with the business strategy. We started with the role of IT in enterprises, how IT is critical for the very survival of enterprises, and we went into the different aspects of how IT could be used by ensuring that you understand the business environment, the business strategy, and the IT strategy has to be in tune or aligned with the business strategy. You also need to have different types of committee to steer the implementation of IT based on the strategy, and this way you have the IT steering committee. We also have one more committee called the IT strategy committee. Quite often you have questions around what are the role and functions of the IT strategy committee and IT steering committee. The next part is pertaining to IT strategic planning. Now this has got different aspects of how IT strategic planning is done. It might look a little complex when you read the details. You will be wondering whether you need to remember so many details. I'll just give a small tip. Remember, you already studied about management and you know how strategic planning is done as per the management from a business perspective. Now here, you need to bring the same paradigm of principles and apply it to IT strategic planning. What are the key aspects which are covered in this presentation? We saw what are the process of IT strategic planning. So we went through how the enterprise strategic planning is done, and based on that, how do you do the IT strategic planning? What are the different steps which are followed? We also understood what are the objectives of the enterprise plan, enterprise strategic plan, and how the business objectives which are set, and these business objectives are taken and further translated into IT strategic plan, because IT is the channel or the mechanism for delivering the business process and services. We also saw that architecture, as far as the information is concerned, in terms of the information architecture, the information systems architecture, the data architecture, and the delivery architecture. We also understood what are the different ways the information has to be classified based on the business process needs. Fundamentally, when you look at IT strategic planning, you're looking at information as the currency of the modern enterprise. You need to ensure that this information is available, not only available to the users when required, but also ensure that this information is properly secured. There are various management practices which you can have. There are also governance practices which ensure that the IT strategic planning is implemented and you are able to deliver results as required. Ultimately, when you are implementing IT, there are two types of expenditure: the investment in implementing a new IT project and the expenditure in IT. What the management wants is to ensure they are able to derive the business value from IT, because how IT projects succeed or fail will determine the success or failure of the enterprise. So IT strategic planning is the most critical aspect for the successful deployment of IT in enterprises. As CA students, we need to relate IT strategy planning with the business strategy planning, then you find it becomes very easy to understand. But if you try to read the subject in isolation, it looks a little complex. So you need to understand what are the different aspects which are covered. Then you'll find when you're able to relate it to the business process aspects, this becomes easier to understand. I hope the key word you remember from this presentation is alignment. We look forward to meeting you in the next presentation. Thank you very much.